Hello, bonjour, and welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Keefe, Business Advisor here at the World Trade Centre Winnipeg. I would like to begin today's webinar with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the lands of Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Innu, Denisovan, and Dakota Oye nations. We acknowledge we're also on the homelands of the Red River Métis, and that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. The World Trade Centre Winnipeg team respects the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledges the harms and mistakes of the past and present throughout our nation. Thank you for joining our webinar, Using Statistical Information to Make Informed Business Decisions, which will be presented by Darren Lazupski of Statistics Canada. Before we begin, I'd just like to share a few housekeeping items. Please send all of your webinar questions directly to the chat box at the top of your screen, and Darren will try to answer as many as he can during the session, as well as a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box, and I'll answer your questions as soon as possible. And you'll also be receiving a PDF copy and recording of this presentation within the next week or so. And now it's time to start our webinar. I'd like to introduce you to Darren Lazupski. Darren is a consulting analyst with Statistics Canada. During his career, Darren has worked in the private and nonprofit sectors and also taught at the University of Manitoba. A second-generation Canadian, born and raised in Winnipeg, Darren holds a master's degree in city planning from the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Manitoba and an undergraduate degree in urban studies from the University of Winnipeg. Welcome, Darren. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Paul. Merci beaucoup. Yes, hello everyone. Welcome. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. My name is Darren Lazupski, as Paula said, and I'm going to be walking you through this session today. One of the things that I was mentioning before we begin is that I like to teach these sessions as informally as possible. And so I encourage questions. I encourage you to sort of think about data in a critical way. I want you to be critical, but I want you to think critically. And so if there are questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat, as Paul is saying. But if I'm going over a topic or a section that I've gone over too quickly, or if you would like me to revisit, please feel free to let us know, and I'm happy to go back and explore something in more detail. I always come and sort of approach these sessions with a philosophy that this is your session, and I want you to get as much as you can from it. So I want you to feel free to get involved and to be engaged with the material we're going to be presenting today. So as we've said, we're going to be trying to give you some information to think about how you can use information in an effective manner, how you can find information. So part of my job, and I'll talk shortly about Statistics Canada, our role as the National Statistical Agency, but I just wanted to quickly sort of highlight what we're going to try and cover today. And I have a lot that I'm going to be sort of throwing at you and sort of putting in front of you for consideration. But hopefully I will have some time at the end for a quick navigation of the Statistics Canada website. One of the things that we often hear when I'm engaging with people who are looking for data is that the website, StatsCan's website, can be a little bit intimidating, a little bit sort of challenging to navigate. So if I have some time today, I'll try and give you a little crash course on that. But I do want to try and leave some time for questions if people have questions at the end. And so I just wanted to sort of talk very briefly before we begin about Statistics Canada, and I think I may have a couple of colleagues sitting in on the call as well, and so I may reach out to them if I don't have the answer to questions during the question and answer session. And they're more than welcome to jump in and help out. We're always a team at StatsCan. But I just wanted to mention, as the National Statistical Agency, we are tasked with, and the Statistics Act defines our role as the collection, compilation, and dissemination of information about the country, about its people, about its resources, about its economy. And, our objective is to provide good, reliable information. But we're also tasked with another aspect, which is to build statistical capacity and data literacy. And so part of that is to increase awareness of the type of data that Statistics Canada has. I always remind people that, this is your data. We want you to be using it and using it to the most effective way possible. And part of working with data and appreciating its value and its utility is recognizing its strengths and its limitations and being able to interpret and understand the data as accurately as possible. So this is why when the World Trade Center extended the invitation for me to join, I was happy to do it because, we're happy to sort of reach out to more Canadians to let them know about what might be available. In today's session, I'm going to be highlighting a dozen or so different data sets, but there are hundreds of surveys that Statistics Canada is active in. And so if I don't touch on a topic that you might be particularly interested in, there may be data available for it. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're not doing it now, to sort of regularly visit the Statistics Canada website and use that as a springboard to look at some of the other data sets and data tables and information that might be available for you that I haven't sort of highlighted on today's discussion. So that's a quick introduction to my role as a consulting analyst and course instructor with Statistics Canada. But let's get into sort of some of the actual data sets that we want Canadians and data consumers to be familiar with. So the first thing we like to do is just sort of set a context in terms of, asking, just like any good research question. I used to teach research methods. Part of research methods is thinking about what type of research question are you trying to answer, or what type of data gap are you trying to fill. And so you'll be looking for data that is existing, so secondary data that might be available to you, as opposed to or prior to conducting primary research. And sometimes conducting primary research, collecting data on your own, is the way to go if existing data doesn't fit your need or provide the information that you're looking for. But you always want to start thinking about what are the type of questions that you're trying to answer with data. And so particularly in the context of business decisions, there are a host of different questions that you might be facing in terms of, how large is my potential market? What type of products are in demand? Is there data that affords me the opportunity to get a sense of what are Canadians currently spending on goods and services? Is there a potential opportunity to dive into our business opportunities, either locally, international, or nationally or internationally? And so we'll talk a little bit about just understanding the type of data that's available. Much of the data that Statistics Canada has allows you to look at, how different industries, as part of the sort of the economic structure of Canada, are faring in terms of employment and goods produced and things of that nature. There's also data that is from Statistics Canada, but is not necessarily reported on Statistics Canada's website. If you look at the Innovation in Science Canada federal government department, I apologize to my colleagues, I've forgotten the actual department's name. They will have information on financial performance. It's information derived from Statistics Canada, but it's helpful in terms of what type of expectations might you have with respect to business costs and employment costs and things of that nature. So that type of information can be crucially important if you're thinking about or in the process of developing business plans and things of that nature. So those are just some of the sort of questions that you might be thinking about, and we're going to try and point you to some data sets that are going to help you sort of answer some of these questions and potentially even raise further questions. So as I said, we're trying to encourage you to think about what type of data I have, and Statistics Canada's role in many instances is to provide sort of a benchmark or a foundation on which you can build on. So, we might not be able to sort of answer the specific questions, but we're able to provide a good framework or a benchmark to sort of base decisions upon. So we have a whole host of different data sets that I'm going to introduce you to. So if you're trying to identify your target population or your target audience for your product, thinking about demographics. So this isn't necessarily business related, but it's in tune with or in the context of understanding what type of market you might have. We also have data that we can look at the current labor marketing conditions and employment and things of that nature, wages, job vacancies. I'll talk very briefly about the job vacancy survey as part of what's called labor market information, as well as several of the other sort of data sets. And I always remind people when this slide comes up is that oftentimes we're looking for data, and I use labor market information as a prime example. There isn't one single data set or data source. There are multiple data sources and data sets where you're in a position where you have to sort of understand them and be able to combine them to sort of glean a fuller picture. And so that's one of the challenges. It would be nice if all the data we needed was in one survey or one data set, but that's not how the real world works. And so being familiar with what's available is part of the process. And so that's sort of what we're going to try and talk a little bit about today. We always sort of start off, people, this is a session that talks about business decisions and using information to make business decisions. But we sort of ironically start off by not actually talking about business specific data. Instead, we start off by a bit of a broader perspective, stepping back and saying, what data sets are available that allow you to understand or to get a scope of your market, your target, your audience for your products or goods or services. And one of the best data sources that's available is the census of population. And so the census is one of the largest undertakings that Statistics Canada does. The census is, by definition, a complete enumeration of the entire population at a point in time. And in Canada, a census is done every 5 years. And the reason we focus on the census as a starting point, even though it's not directly related to business per se, is that the census is one of the data sources that's going to give you the opportunity to look at very detailed information. And so it allows you to look at population and socioeconomic characteristics that are likely going to be very informative when you're thinking about how big is my market, what are the characteristics of my market, or you might even have in the back of your mind whom your market is, but you might want to have a sense of what is the purchasing power that's my market or the market that you have in mind might have. What's the characteristics in terms of age structure? Age is a good indicator of behavior. And so age can often dictate the types of goods and services that different segments of the population are looking for. And the census allows us to answer all of those different questions with great detail. I'm not going to turn this into a research methods class, I promise. But the one distinction I will draw to your attention is that some of the other data sets that I'm going to be referring to or talking about today are going to be some from administrative data, but much of them are going to be from surveys, sample surveys, representative sample surveys, where we're using a sample to a random sample to allow us to collect data in an efficient and cost-effective way, and then produce estimates that are reflective of the entire population. But by doing so, it often means that the data that's available is going to be limited in terms of the geographical detail. Sometimes you'll run into situations where the data is only available at the provincial level or the national provincial level. Sometimes you might find instances in data sets where information is down to the city level, large cities. In Canada, in Statistics Canada, we define large cities as census metropolitan areas, CMAs. Those are cities of 100,000 or more, under population of 100,000 or more, with a core population of about 50,000 or more. And I should know the top of my head. I think there's 42 CMAs in Canada as of the last 2021 census. And so those are what we define as large cities. And oftentimes some of the data is available down to that level, but no further. So if you wanted to get a sense of, well, how many people in my neighborhood might be a potential market. You know, if you wanted to know how many people in a section of the city of Winnipeg spoke Farsi or had a disposable income of $90,000 or more, or had an educational attainment level of a master's degree or higher, or less than high school. Those are the type of questions that the census allows us to look at. It allows us to look at the detailed age structure, detailed income, average household income, median household income, before and after tax, so you get a sense of what disposable income might be, and for smaller neighborhoods, for smaller areas within the city. So if that's something that is helpful to you, you can even look at ethnic cultural distinctions within the population. I mentioned the census allows us to identify how many people speak a particular language, how many people are of a particular ethnic or cultural background. The census allows us to answer those types of questions. So this is why the census is a starting point, because it helps us sort of get a sense of how big my market might be, how big my audience might be, how it's changing, how its age structure is faring over time. You might be targeting or thinking of focusing on recent immigrants to Canada. The census allows us to get a sense of just how many those folks are and where they're located. So census can be extremely important. I will, if I have time, I'll quickly sort of walk you through. Statistics Canada offers an entire workshop dedicated just to helping people get a better sense of what's available from the census because of its immensity. So I'm giving you a quick introduction to what you can do with census data from a marketing perspective. And again, just an example here, if you want to think about how important it might be to know what incomes are. Oh, is there a
note taker that listens and takes notes for me.
Is there a question? If there's a question, feel free to interject. But I just provide an example in terms of how helpful it might be to get a sense of how incomes are changing for your particular audience or potential audience and that you're looking for. So that's the census. And as I said, it's not directly related to business. And the other data set that we use as sort of a springboard or starting point is not also directly related to business data per se, but can be crucially useful when you're starting to think about, well, what are Canadians spending? What type of goods or services are Canadians buying? How much are they spending on those goods and services? How much are they spending on car repair and eating out in restaurants? And one of the data sets that can be extremely useful to help us answer those type of questions, even though data is only available at the provincial level, is the survey of household spending. So survey of household spending is a survey that's conducted every 2 years. And it, as I said, it gives us an opportunity to look to see by income quintile. So income quintile is sort of a fancy way of saying we've taken the population and divided them into 5 equal groups, and we've grouped them by their income levels. So low income, middle income, high income. And you can look to see what are the types of characteristics in terms of what are higher income as opposed to lower income households spending their disposable income on. And if you wanted to get a sense of what type or how big my potential market be, what is the potential amount that people are willing to spend, the survey of household spending is one of those data sets that can help you get a sense of that. And I won't spend too much time, but there are a number of tables that allow us to look at different characteristics, you know, homeowners versus renters and things of that nature. So it can be an extremely useful data source for you to get some of that, as I said, benchmark information if you're developing a business plan. So survey of household spending is, again, there's an example, just some of the findings from this survey in terms of what average Canadian households are spending on things like purchasing for pets or bicycles, entertainment, recreation services. Think how useful it can be to have this type of data in terms of actual amounts that typical Canadians are spending as a basis for thinking about a business plan. So knowing how Canadians spend their money, knowing how Manitobans spend their money is one of the useful aspects of being familiar with this data set. Okay, So we've talked about a couple of data sets and data sources that I want you to be familiar with. Before we get into sort of more specific data that's business specific, I also want to talk a bit about how information is organized or classified. And the reason we spend a few moments talking about this is because much of the data, not all of it, but much of the data that you're going to encounter, that you're going to sort of find, for example, I mentioned Innovation in Science Canada's financial output tool that allows you to look at costs and expenses for different industries. It's broken down or provided at the what's called the NAICS level, the North American Industrial Classification System. And the North American Industrial Classification System is a way to organize businesses by the nature of what they do in a hierarchical manner. So it starts from a very broad perspective. Accommodation and food services is an example that we show on the slide. And then it allows you to drill down into further and further detail. So the more detailed the NAICS code, the North American Industrial Classification Code, the more detailed the information about that specific industry, that specific firm activity. And so one of the things I encourage people to be familiar with, I'll be readily honest, it's not the most exciting reading in the world, but it's helpful to be familiar with the NAICS classification. It'll give you an indication of where your activity might lie. So this allows you to then, knowing where your business activity lies in terms of which classification or which industry, you can then use other data sources. And I'll show you some of the data sources specifically, like the Canadian Business Counts. Canadian Business Counts data that I'll show you shortly reports the number of businesses in Canada, those with employees and those without, based on those who have a certain threshold of revenue. So any business with a revenue of 30,000 or more is going to be included in the business registry. And the business registry reports data by NAICS codes. So this is just an example of why I spend some time in this session, just introducing people to the NAICS and sort of making a case for why it's helpful to be familiar with the classification. I don't know if there's any questions at this point. If there are, as I said, feel free, and Paul, feel free to interject if there's anything that that people have raised that they want me to go back to. But I will.
Yeah, I actually had one, Darren. So
yeah, please go
with
ahead.
a lot of these surveys, how many respondents are they usually looking for, like StatsCan, and is there a target number? Yeah, if you could speak to that.
Fantastic. That's actually a fantastic question. So all the different surveys will have different sample sizes. And so the labor force survey, for example, is one of our largest surveys. It has a sample size, and again, my colleague Desiree can jump in if I'm wrong, somewhere around 55,000 Canadians. It's individuals are included in the target population. And we shoot for, and this is one of the challenges National Statistical Agency and Stats Canada, national statistical agencies across the world are facing, is declining response rates. And so declining response rates. So if you ever receive a letter from Statistics Canada saying, you lucky soul, you've been selected to participate in the survey, it's really important that you participate, because the more Canadians who participate, the more reliable the data. But there is no single answer for what is the expected response rate. It differs by different surveys. It differs by data collection method. Again, I won't turn this into a research methods class, but if you ever took research methods, you know that different data collection methods have different sort of reasonable response rates. A mail-out survey has a different response rate than a face-to-face survey. But ideally, we're trying to look for reasonable response rates in order to allow us to release data that we feel is a reasonable representation. We have data quality standards, and this is why sometimes the data is not available at smaller levels of geography, because the sample size simply wouldn't allow us to get reliable estimates for Brandon, for example, just because the sample size isn't big enough. So again, if you let me, I'll turn into research, but I'll try not to. But that's the basic premise of there's different sample sizes for different surveys. One of the things I encourage you, if I point you to the Canadian, there's a survey called the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. If you look at any of the data tables, I'll try and remember to show this when we go to the website, if you go down to any of the data tables and you click on additional information, that will take you to the background page, basically metadata about the survey. And that will tell you the frequency of the survey. Is it monthly? Is it yearly? Is it every 3 years? It'll also tell you the target population. So you need to know who's being included and who's being excluded. For example, the CEF data, the Survey of Employment and Payroll Hours, it has certain industries that are excluded from the target population. So it's helpful to know that. But it will also tell you how big the sample size is. So I won't take too much time there, but I hope that answers the question with respect to sample sizes.
No, absolutely. And I feel like we could already start getting ready, bookmark a session 2. You can dive deeper into a lot of these aspects. We had 2 more questions.
Yeah, please.
This first one, I'm not too sure. It might reference it looks like a link in the bottom, but Mario said, can you provide the link for the business registry? I don't know what that's referring to, but if so, these links will be in the PDF slide at the end of the session. So stay tuned for those when we send out the email. And then Annie has a question. Is participation in industry-based surveys mandatory, or are they mostly voluntary?
Another great question. So Statistics Canada, the census, for example, many of you know is mandatory that Canadians participate. Many of our business surveys, this is outlined in the Statistics Act, Section 12, outlined in the Statistics Act, that many of the business surveys are mandatory, but not all of them. So some of them are voluntary, some of them are mandatory. So I can't say across the board yes or no, but many of the business surveys, just because of the priority placed on how important the data is, the federal government and the Statistics Act gives Statistics Canada the authority to make some surveys mandatory. Many of the business surveys are. So, and we can go, as I said, if you look at the background of the metadata for each survey, it will tell you this is a mandatory survey, this is a voluntary survey. So there's no single answer for that. It's a great question, though. So
perfect. I think that's it for questions for now, Darren. So we keep rolling.
Thank you very much. So as I said, we've got a lot to cover here, and if we don't get to the website navigation, it's not the end of the world, but I will try to sort of use that, because the website navigation, as Paul said, you'll get a copy of the slides. There will be links there, but I'll also try and sort of help you find particular data sets you'd like to find on StatScan website during the navigation tour. But I just want to quickly go over some of the other data sets. Now we're getting specifically into business related data. And one of the key data sets that can be really useful, it's actually a data set StatScan uses in conjunction with other data sets. Like, for example, we use the business counts in conjunction with trade data to identify the characteristics of firms involved in export or importing of goods or services. But business counts is a data set that gets released twice a year, June and December. And it's now data that's released at the city level, so CMA, but also smaller levels. So, you know, not just data for Winnipeg, but for Brandon. And you can look to see how many businesses there are in all of the different industries. So classified by the NAICS codes, you can look at how many businesses there are in management, how many businesses there are in agriculture and food, whatever the broad classifications are. So it's a really useful data set. It also provides some additional information in terms of businesses by size. So businesses, how many businesses there are that have 1 to 5 employees, how many businesses have 500 or more employees. So you can look to see some of the characteristics of businesses in your community. And identify how many businesses. So if you have a business idea, you can get a sense of how many businesses already exist in your industry classification. There may be many, there may be few. This data will help you answer that. So that's Canadian business counts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, because I know that many people who are doing business planning might be looking at either import or export businesses, we always want to make sure that we highlight trade data. And in this case, I want to make the distinction. So StatsCan distinguishes between retail and wholesale trade and international trade. So resale and wholesale trade, there are a host of different data tables that allow you to look to see from a retail perspective, goods and services, how well a retailer is doing, things of that nature. And so that's the retail and wholesale trade statistics. If we have time on the StatsCan website, I'll show you the distinction between that and the international trade. If we don't have time, if you do go to Statistics Canada's website, you'll see that there are 8 boxes along the landing page. The first one is subjects. If you click on subjects, it will have 31 broad classifications of topics. And one of those topics will be retail and wholesale. Another one will be international trade. And so if you specifically want to get a handle on retail trade, big business, big retailers and things of that nature, there's statistics that allow you to look at that. And if you want to look at international trade, import and export, which I suspect many people might be interested in. Now, creating a business plan for export is a task in and of itself, but if you're thinking about importing, you can use much of the information from StatsCan. If you're looking at exporting, you want to think about the questions I've raised from the census. What's the population? What's the age structure? What's the income for the community, or the countries you're thinking of exporting to? So you'll look at their national statistical agencies and try and glean some of that information. But it's really useful in terms of people being familiar with the Canadian International Merchandise Trade web application, which allows us to look at what goods are being exported and to what countries and in what extent, what's the value, what's the magnitude. Here, and I don't have time to delve into the great detail, but much of the trade data is going to be based on NAICS, or industries, but some of the data is going to be based on what are called HS codes or harmonization codes. And they're essentially a way of classifying, the World Trade Organization, it's a way of classifying goods, primarily goods, by their particular nature, agricultural goods, food production goods, engineering, automobile parts, things of that nature. And there are ways of looking at the concordance between HS and NAICS codes, but I just want data users to be familiar with, you're going to run into 3 actually classifications. You're going to run into HS codes, you're going to run into NAICS codes, and you're going to run into NAP codes, National Product Classification, the product classification codes. That's not as common, but you're going to run into those as well. And those are basically a broader classification of the HS codes. So no one said doing business plans was going to be easy, but being familiar with what type of data is there is part of the starting point. So I want you to be familiar with the different trade-related data that's available from Statistics Canada. There are a number of interactive tools that I probably won't have time to show you today, but you can look at, and again, it basically allows you to narrow in on what type of goods are Canadians exporting to other countries, or what type of goods and services are Canadians importing, and from where. So we're able to look at the top 25 trading partners that Canada has, the top 25 trading partners that Canada exports grains or exports aircraft material to, or machine parts or things of that nature, as well as services. And exporting or importing services, again, is part of the overall trade picture. So without having the time to delve into too detail, I just wanted to make sure that people are familiar with the data that's available from a trade perspective on StatsCan's website. One of the things that I always sort of focus on in this session, because we've been collecting trade data for a long time, but one of the new sources of data that was started during COVID was a survey called the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. And it's a data set that is somewhat unique in that if you think about the other examples I've shown you, the trade data and the retail trade, those will all provide quantitative measures. They'll tell you how much is being traded, who's it's being traded to, and all things of that nature. So that's great. It sets the magnitude, it sets the parameters, it tells you value. It's quantitative in nature. The Canadian Survey on Business Condition provides some qualitative information in that it asks questions from business owners about their expectations. Are they optimistic about the next 3 months? Are they optimistic over the next year? Are they pessimistic about how their business is doing? We ask questions like, what do you anticipate your revenues to be? Do you anticipate your revenues to increase or decline over the next 3 months? We ask them about the challenges that they run into. So we ask them about supply chain challenges. We ask them about retaining staff. And so all those are the type of questions that we are asking businesses on the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions data set. So it can be really useful, particularly in terms of getting a sense of, how businesses are faring, what their sort of interpretation of the future might be. But in addition to that, the key aspect of this survey is that we collect data not just by industry. We have data by industry, how optimistic the different industries are, but we also have data by ownership characteristics. So it's a data set that is starting to allow us to fill some data gaps. So we're able to identify businesses owned by women, businesses owned by Indigenous population, businesses owned by visible minorities, a racialized population, in addition to businesses that import or export. So think of how useful this data can be if you want to get a sense of how are exporter businesses feeling in terms of how optimistic they are compared to importer businesses, or how optimistic are women-owned businesses compared to businesses owned by racialized minority population. This data set will allow you to answer some of those questions. And so I'll show you a couple of examples, just a couple of short examples of some of the data. It also allows us to look at rural urban. So oftentimes we sort of forget that, yes, we're an urban nation, but we have 6 million Canadians who are rural, and many businesses are located in rural settings. So how do we fare, or how do we compare the urban to rural challenges that are evident among different businesses? This data set allows us to answer some of those questions. So I'll show you some examples there. And then the survey on innovation and business strategy allows us to look at the different types of different business innovations that businesses are adopting. How many businesses are adopting e-pay or things of that nature? How many businesses are adopting different strategies for HR and things of that nature? So two very interesting data sets that I wanted to bring to your attention that people generally aren't familiar with. And I'm encouraging you, even if we don't have the time today, to explore them in more detail because they're quite interesting. I'm going to show you a quick example from the Canadian Business Survey, Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. Some of the types of questions that are asked. So we're asking businesses, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing? And businesses are identifying things like increasing inflation, rising costs of inputs, rising interest rates and debt-related costs, costs of insurance, rising costs of real estate. Those in addition to other questions like, retaining staff and hiring staff and things of that nature. What are some of the obstacles that businesses are facing? And so this is data that's available at the national level. It's data available at the provincial level. And for some cities, not all because of sample size, for some cities, Winnipeg, there is data for the city of Winnipeg. So I want people to be familiar with this data set. It's a data set that's released quarterly, so 4 times a year. And it's just something I want people to be familiar with. Here's just another example in terms of, we can compare how rural to urban businesses are faring, and by business size and things of that nature. You can look at how old or young a business is. So here's just another example. The data set allows us to look at businesses that are started in the last year or last 2 years compared to businesses that are long established. And you can compare to see, this question asks, what are your expectations for your operating expenses? What are your expectations for your revenue based on how long a business has been in existence? And this is data for Winnipeg. And you'll get to see just how much of a challenge it is for new businesses who are starting in terms of expecting increasing income as opposed to increasing expenses. So that's just an example of what you can do with the data. If I had more time, and I'd love to, we could spend a whole day just going through this data set. And last thing I'd like to sort of highlight is something I've sort of alluded to earlier, which was a data set that's not hosted on Statistics Canada's website per se, but it's data based on Statistics Canada data, and is the data that allows you to look at financial performance. You can produce reports by NAICS code, by revenue thresholds, and it'll allow you to get a sense of what are some of the sort of balance sheet challenges that businesses are going to be encountering in terms of expected revenue, expected cost for staff, expected cost for overhead. What are businesses in different sizes? What are the type of costs they are experiencing, so that you get a sort of a benchmark to how you might fare or how your business is faring compared to others. So I will show you, if we have time, I'll show you the link towards that and how useful that information can be in terms of understanding how your particular industry or business is faring. And then to just wrap up, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about labor market information, but obviously labor market is going to be an important consideration for all businesses, particularly businesses that are providing services, but goods as well, in terms of what's the challenges of hiring. This is one of the things we keep hearing from the Canadian Business Service, is the challenge of hiring and retaining staff. What are some of the cost expectations? So one of the tools that is on Statistics Canada's website is the Canadian Economic Tracker. So you can look to see how different businesses are faring in terms of employment rates and business closures and openings and things of that nature, coupled with earnings and job vacancies. And one of the surveys that I haven't gone into in great detail is a job vacancy survey that's conducted. I believe it's quarterly, but my colleagues can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. And it gives you an indication of, from the job vacancy survey, it collects data from businesses, and we ask businesses, how many positions are you having trouble filling that you could or would like to fill? So we can calculate the job vacancy ratio. And you can look by industry, which industries are facing the most challenges in terms of finding staff to fill positions they'd like to fill. So the Canadian Economic Tracker and the Labor Force in Survey interactive tool will also provide, and this is what we're getting to in terms of getting an indication of just how job vacancy rates or job vacancies are faring over time, which industries are facing the biggest challenges, and then the labor market challenges with respect to employment rates, participation rates, characteristics by age and gender as well, by industry. So those are some quick tools that I wanted to sort of quickly introduce people to. And then, as I said, I always purposely try to leave some time to visit Statistics Canada's website. I'll just close up by, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Statistics Canada. I know people could be joining from all over the place here today. So you can use the info stats email. You can send your questions, and they will direct you to a consulting analyst like myself, who will then help you try and either direct you to particular data sets or help you answer some of your questions, maybe even sort of point you to some data sources that you might not be familiar with. And so those are sort of the last things I wanted to raise before we wrap up. If you're not familiar with Statistics Canada, I encourage you to go to the website, look at the daily. It's not the most original name in the world, but it's our daily newsletter. Look at the daily, because it will give you an indication of what's being released. It will also, and if I have time, I'll show you how you can search the daily, and you can look for business-related data and trade-related data and things of that nature. So with that, I think that is, sorry, just wanted to say thank you. Megwitch, thank you very much. And Paul, is it okay for me to stop sharing, or are there any questions that people would like me to visit with the slides that I've been covering?
So there were a couple questions, but I think it'd be good if you can, we have lots of time still. So if you want to maybe share navigating the website, people
Certainly.
can, think about if they have any other questions. And then I've just noted those two down. And then, we'll kind of do questions right at the end.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, I always want to make sure I leave some time. It's going to be quick, but I just want to give you a quick intro to the website. So let me see if I can. Yeah, so I'm always technically challenged. If I can share my screen.
It's okay, Darren. We practiced this. You got this. There we go.
You're able to see the StatsCan website?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So as I said, I can't tell you how often, and if my colleagues are on the line, they'll have a chuckle when they hear this because it's so true. I can't tell you how often we have people say to us, "I went to your website and I got lost. There's just so much there." And so one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to make it a little bit easier to sort of navigate. And I'm going to show you some quick tips to find your way around, or hopefully some quick tips. First thing I'll highlight is I started the session talking about the census and how valuable the census can be, not just from a business perspective, but as a citizen. If you want to know more about your community, the census is a really useful tool. And it's so important that if you look on our landing page, there are, I call them tabs. I don't know if they're technically tabs or not, but you'll see these 8 boxes: subject, data, analysis, reference, geography, and census. And then information for, if you get selected, the information for participants, about StatsCan, and then Government of Canada. There's a specific tab dedicated just to the census. And so if you click on the census, it will take you to the census of population. This is distinct from the census of agriculture. There's also a census for agriculture, but census of population is where you would go to get detailed data about your communities. And if you click on it, I'll just quickly take you to the census landing page, and you'll see similar tabs: census data, analysis, reference. So analysis is articles that we produce to help try and summarize the information. Reference are reference documents, user guides, census dictionary, things of that nature. Census geography describes the different geographies that are available. But the census data is the tab I just want to quickly draw people's attention to, and sort of highlight the two key data sources that people often use as a stepping stone into the census. The first is census profile, and the second are data tables. Census profile is basically a file that allows you to select your geographic area. So for example, I'm going to click on census profile, and you can look for sort of communities. I'll pick Winnipeg, just since I'm being biased and I'm in Winnipeg. You might be spread all across the province or the country, but and it will provide you with a quick synopsis of some basic demographic information, education, age levels, all that. And so oftentimes people will use this as a springboard to get a sense of just basic counts. And if I quickly click on add remove data, this will give you an indication of the type of variables: age, commuting. You might want to know, maybe you're thinking of starting an active commuting business, a biking business. You might want to know how many people commute and how many people use bikes to commute in your community. Education, ethnic, cultural, a whole host of all the sort of type of variables that I've alluded to. So that's the census profile. And I'm just going to click on home, just so everyone knows how I'm getting to where I'm going. I'm just going to click back on home, I'm going to click back on census, take us back. I'm going to click on census data again, but now I'm going to click on data tables. And the data tables, I'm just going to sort of highlight. Profile provides a nice introduction. The data table allows you to look at more detailed data. And so here we can look at these different topics. But what the data tables do is it allows you to cross-tabulate. So if I wanted to look at educational attainment level by income, the data table will allow me to look at those type of detail, whereas the census profile just provides the basic counts. And so I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but you'll see that we have data, particular income. So if I wanted to know what the average or the after-tax income for particular households are in my community, I can go to the income table and look at income data. And again, income data can be really crucial in terms of understanding what disposable income your market or your audience might have. So you can use that as a basis for it. But if you wanted to get a sense of what type of languages people are speaking, the census allows us to look at that. So just a quick synopsis of that. I'm not going to spend too much time because we don't have time, but I do want to sort of highlight, if I go back to the home page and draw your attention to the subject. And if we, oftentimes one of the things that I highlight for people is if you're not exactly sure where to begin, the subject is usually one of the best places to start, because this will provide that sort of broad topic that you might be looking for. And here, as I mentioned earlier, if you wanted retail data, maybe you're thinking of looking at a retail establishment, you'll have data on retail. So if I click on retail, it'll provide me data on sales, retail sales by type of product, inventory sales, retail stores by type of store, e-store as opposed to brick and mortar stores. So that's, as well as a host of different tools, food services and things of that nature. So that's retail. But remember, I reminded you or drew your attention to the fact that we distinguish between that and international trade. So if I click on international trade, this takes us to the Canadian International Merchandise Trade application I was referring to. But it also allows us to look at exactly who are we exporting and importing goods and services to. So this will serve as your springboard to that. And this international trade tracker, we can use this tool to see, if I click on it, you look to see by particular products. I can see just a quick glimpse. What's the value? What's the magnitude of trade involved in agriculture or airplane parts or things of that nature? And we get a sense of who we're exporting that information to or importing from. So that's trade data. And then I'll just quickly go home again and go back to the subject. So I'm trying not to do this. I've had people say, whoa, how'd you get there again? So I'm trying to go slow enough where you see where I'm going. And you'll see here business consumer products, so services, but also business performance and ownership. And if I click on business performance and ownership, this is where you start to get a sense of the business counts, business ownership, but also the link to the data I was referring to in terms of, where is it here? Financial performances, which isn't technically hosted on StatsCan's website, but it is the link that allows us, and I'm just going to quickly click on this link. So if you see, again, business performance and ownership, I'll scroll down the page and click on financial performance. And here's where you can create reports on particular industries, NAICS codes, and you can look to see, I'll create a report. And I know we don't have too much time, so I'm going quickly, but
I don't think that will work. I shared this link earlier in the presentation, and whenever I clicked on that, yeah, it just kind of kept loading. So they might be just doing an update on the web page, but yeah, that is a common tool that we will share. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And you know what? This is one way to get to it. I'm just going to go back. Yeah, I'm just going to go back and go to the home page, StatsCan homepage. And there's another way to get it. It's actually one of the things about StatsCan's webpage is there are different ways to get to them. If I click on this bar here, Canada, it takes me to all the different government departments, and you can search Innovation in Science Canada and find the information there. I believe, I might be wrong, it's under market research, but I'm not 100% certain. So that's a quick introduction to sort of, I know we don't have much time left, but the other thing is, if you wanted to look up the Canadian Business Survey, you can also always just do the good old-fashioned search. Hopefully this will take me to what I want. And I wanted to just show you quickly the tables that are available. Oh, okay. I'm going to show another way. If I go to daily, if I click on the daily, I can look under release by subject. And this will also take me to all the different topics I was referring to and provide you a link of what's been released recently. And this will take me to the most recent release for the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. And I just quickly want to show you all the different tables that are available. So we can look to see business organizations' expectations, most challenging obstacles that businesses are facing, etc. And I'm just going to quickly open this table. And I want to show you what I mean by the level of detail that's available. So by age of business, by majority ownership, First Nations, Métis, by visible minority status, by businesses that import and export. That's the extent of the type of data that's available. So I know we're out of time. I just wanted to give a real quick overview in that. I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions?
Yeah, so we had a couple. The last element of the website you showed might actually point Annie in the right direction here, but her question was, can you search the database of surveys by field of interest, for example, human resources, and find all surveys that would apply to this field?
Yes. So it's a great question. Those tabs, the search, if you go to data, if you click on data, and you can filter there. So if you go to StatsCan homepage and click on the data tab, and then type in what you're looking for, it will list. I don't know if I have time to. I'll share the screen again, but it will list. Like for example, you can type in trade, and it will list all the different data tables that are available, and then you can refine that. So if you're looking for a particular survey, or it will list all the different surveys, and you can click on the different surveys, and it will then filter to just the data from those surveys. I think that's what you're asking. I'm not sure if I understood exactly, but there are ways of filtering, and using the data. The reason I don't go to the data one is oftentimes you go to the data tab when you already have an idea of what you're looking for. And then you say, I have an idea of what I'm looking for. I just need to filter A, the most recent, or B, which survey it's from. So oftentimes people who are a little bit more advanced and they have a rough idea, you can use that as a way to sort of quickly find what you're looking for. And the nice thing about it is you can narrow the scope down to just data tables or just analytical articles, and just for that particular survey, even to the level of just data at the provincial level. And you can filter, because there's 11,000 tables on StatsCan's website, and it's going to take a while to work through all of them. So allowing users to filter, it just makes it more manageable, easier.
For sure. No, that's fantastic. And for the next question, basically also just to address the group. So here at the World Trade Centre Winnipeg, we do offer Manitoba-based entrepreneurs and businesses a free hour of secondary market research. And a lot of these tools, we will help conduct this secondary market research for you. So, talking about the census data, and down to a specific area of the city, we can do that with some of our tools in a nice radius. So if you're trying to open a retail location, on Academy, we could drop a pin on a location, and 135 kilometers out, it will split all those data points up, among many other great tools and databases we have access to. So I put in the chat a link to our advisory services, filling out the secondary market research request form if you like. But I will put the question to you, Darren, and also hopefully Nazir will reach out to us and we can help out with their research requests. But just to get your perspective on this, because this is a really specific question and maybe your insights on it. He says, I really need to know about the business of empty container yards in Rosser, Winnipeg, and and scope of this business. How could I navigate the Stats Canada or formula to search correct info? So you might have elaborated a bit on this already with the search tool, but.
Well, it's a very interesting question. The first thing I would do is I would need to narrow down which NAICS code it falls into. Remember, the more detailed the NAICS code. And one of the nice thing, I didn't show it here, but if you go to the if you type in NAICS in our search, it will provide the NAICS homepage. And the nice thing about the NAICS homepage is if you click on the individual broad categories, they will get more and more refined. But there's also a describe button. And so it will start describing what characteristics are included or excluded in this NAICS code. So the first step is to figure out which NAICS classification it would fall into. That one, I'd have to think about which one that would fall into. That's a good question. From there, you could, once you know the NAICS code, you can explore further. I don't know if you'd ever get down to Rosser per se. I doubt it very highly, but probably Winnipeg. And so the next thing would be to look at business counts for that NAICS code.
Yeah, no, and great insight. I think it's something that we could try to help you out with. So please reach out. And I also, if you are in rural Manitoba, RMED is a fantastic organization, and they do have a great tool for rural municipalities around the province of Manitoba. So if you need that really niche data on a beautiful interface dashboard, I shared that link there. We got another question, but real quick, I don't know if Jason's still around, but he did a little shout out. I brought my market research class here today from RSC Polytech and just wanted to thank you on behalf of the 20 to 30 of us that were all here. This was really useful, especially that tour of the website. We'll be heading off to learn NAICS codes next. And, searching NAICS codes, it can be as simple as a Google search, type in what you think your industry has NAICS code, and that will usually pop up, but we can help out with that. I know we're right at time. So we got one last question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Can we know which companies are exporting, as we know which companies are important from the Canadian importers database?
You mean individual companies or just generic? Individual companies will be a challenge because we have to protect confidentiality of respondents. So
absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if we'd be able to identify, but I mean, Stats Canada allows, if the business gives us the right, like if it allows us, but usually no, we have to keep confidentiality at the utmost. So probably not would be my answer.
Okay, no, that's perfect. Okay, so I think we'll wrap up there. We had another thank you for sharing this information, demonstrating how to navigate the website, to utilize the data. It was extremely useful, so that's fantastic.
Good.
So before we take off, I'll just put in the chat our upcoming webinars. So September 24th with Supply Chain Manitoba, we have Supply Chain 101 presented by Aaron Levinsky. On October 10th, we got a great one, Barcodes and Beyond, Getting Your Products to Global Markets, presented by Alain Picard of GS1 Canada. And then October 16th, our live in-person event, WTC Talks, will be at Kilter Brewing with Rick Sush, CEO of Fort Garry Fire Trucks, and Gary Deely, CEO of Big Deal Custom Cases. So we'll love to see everyone out there. Reach out if you need a ticket. And yeah, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, Darren. This is a great webinar, and looking forward to hearing from everyone if they complete their market research request form.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Have fun reading, Darren. That's a big bookshelf to get through.
Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care, everyone.